The common perception about Japan is that its glory days are over. Japan was once an economic power and it used to be the second largest economy in the world, but now its best days are over. Since the 1990s, it's been in steady decline, and now it's been overtaken by China. So the lessons about Japan will be that it was a cautionary tale for the world, and how the mighty can fall, and what can be learned from its mistakes. I want to challenge those assumptions today, because whilst Japan has indeed had nearly 2 decades of very sluggish growth, the fact of the matter is that it still is the world's third largest economy, and it's actually bigger than Germany, or Britain, or France, or even India. Now, that's not to say that Japan does face tremendous challenges ahead. It is a rapidly aging society, and it's a culture that is very risk-averse. But it has evolved from being an exporter of consumer goods, and it's moving away from making electronic goods that are cheaper, that are smaller, that are higher quality, and exporting them. And instead, it is turning into an economy that is providing for the knowledge economy and providing services to address big global issues like environmental sustainability and energy efficiency. It's really leading the way in urban planning and design and, for instance, developing the next generation of new cars. It's also a country that inspires the imagination of people worldwide. Hello Kitty is Japan's official ambassador. Pokemon is a national hero. 2 decades ago, those who were studying Japanese language and culture saw Japan as something that they should do for a good career, that learning Japanese and learning about Japan would actually lead to big paychecks. These days, though, the students who learn Japanese and who want to learn about Japanese cultures are those who are really encouraged to do so by anime, video games, architecture, industrial design, and of course, good food. But how did Japan join the ranks of top industrialized nations in the first place? For that, we have to start with war. And we're not going to start with World War II, but we're going to turn to 1904 to 1905 and the Russo-Japanese War, which was a struggle between Imperial Russia and Japan over the control of China and the Korean Peninsula. This war was the first time that an Asian country won against a Western power. It was also the first time that a Western power actually lost to an Asian one, and it had tremendous implications for power politics in the region. Teddy Roosevelt was instrumental in negotiating the peace between Russia and Japan with the conclusion of the Treaty of Portsmouth. And indeed, Roosevelt actually won the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to actually bring the peace between the two countries. But that's not the only reason why the Russo-Japan War was so pivotal in the history of Japan and indeed Asia. It actually brought forth an Asian country into the realm of colonization and the whole great game of imperialistic approaches to the world. So until then, it was only powers like France, Germany, or Italy, or to a limited extent, the United States, that were scrambling for parts of Africa or indeed Asia. But now, Japan, an Asian country, was part of that game too. And following the Russo-Japanese War, Japan succeeded in furthering its endeavors to modernize rapidly, following the models of Germany and Britain and the United States in particular, expanding its transportation system, privatizing key sectors. It became a huge exporter of textiles, and of course, it enhanced its militarization capabilities as well. So by the end, or on the eve of World War II, I should say, by 1938, Japan had occupied the Korean Peninsula and China, and it became the 7th largest economy in the world. And so you can see on this chart here that in 1890, Britain was the biggest power in terms of economic might in the world, followed by the United States and Germany. Japan falls into 8th place on this chart, but by the time 1938 rolls around, Britain has actually slipped into 3rd place, falling behind the United States at 1st place, Germany in 2nd, and Japan is now at 7th place. The extent of the Japanese Empire was quite formidable. It went beyond the Korean Peninsula and Manchuria, the part of China, and it extended to the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Burma, and as you can see from the chart. But at the end of World War II, Japan's economic base was in shambles. The industries that had been geared towards the war effort were completely flattened. Morale was low. Defeat also meant occupation by the United States, and the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, Douglas MacArthur, essentially ruled Japan for 7 years. But the thing to bear in mind is that what the US government and the Japanese wanted economically actually matched each other. That is to say, both the United States and Japan wanted Japan to recover very quickly from its economic downfall. And that was really for a number of political reasons, not least the rise of the Cold War and the growing Soviet threat. And so to get Japan back on its feet and to be able to offset that communist threat was instrumental for stability in the region. The onset of the Korean War in 1950 furthered Japan's economic trajectory by boosting demand for its goods across the Asia-Pacific and beyond. And there was an emergence of smaller scale industries, and indeed there was a renaissance of smaller scale industries like the ones you see here. After the departure of US occupying forces, Japan's economy expanded still further, and there were a number of reasons for this expansion, not least effective public policies that were introduced to spur private sector growth. The Ministry of International Trade and Industry, known as MITI, played a key role in protecting Japanese companies and pushing through exports. And the financial system also helped by providing low interest rate loans to key industries in Japan. And so, companies that have become household names in the United States, like Sony, Honda, and Toshiba, all blossomed during this period as exports surged and the Japanese trade and finance ministries moved away from supporting declining industries like textiles and coal, and instead encouraged investments and supported sectors that were key to the national interest and had great earning potential and growth potential, which of course meant investing more in electronics and cars, but also steel, petrochemicals, and eventually down the line, semiconductors. Now, the export-led growth of the Japanese economy reached its height by the mid-1980s. And this was the time when Japanese companies went on a rampage to buy up assets left and right overseas. So American icons like Pebble Beach Golf Course, Rockefeller Center, studios in Hollywood were bought out by the Japanese And the Japanese were also eager to shore up European cultural touchstones like Van Gogh's Sunflowers or a number of Stradivarius violins and everything in between. And as corporate Japan flourished, the stock market boomed as well, and those profits were used to buy up real estate, which made the price of real estate in Japan soar astronomically. And investing in real estate wasn't simply a corporate game. It became the daily activity of individual investors as well. Old and young who were eager to invest joined in the bandwagon of the bubble economy, which inflated the price of property to unprecedented heights. Prices actually rose so high that at one stage, the net worth of the grounds of the Imperial Palace in central Tokyo, the grounds of the Imperial Palace alone, exceeded the valuation of the entire state of California. And life for people in Japan became one big party. Graduates of top-tier Japanese universities were courted by blue-chip companies who would offer $500 just for them to show up to a job interview. And then they were offered even more if they actually signed on and said they wanted to join that company. There weren't enough Louis Vuitton bags to stock up all the Japanese department stores. And people thought nothing of spending $100 on the perfect melon or spending $30 on a cup of coffee without batting an eyelid. But really, there was no way that this kind of asset appreciation was going to continue or even be sustained. The crash came as the Japanese government tried to bring down prices gradually, with the government limiting the total volume of real estate lending in 1990, and interest rates were increased to 6%. You can see here that once that policy of trying to rein in loans to buy real estate was tightened, and then you see this crash coming right after 1990 on the Nikkei stock chart. Nikkei is, of course, the Japanese stock market. And you can also see a similar kind of bubble in the housing market as well. So you see this crest of rise of housing prices towards the late 80s into the 90s, and it all comes tumbling down. And it tumbled down, and with that, the party was over. But as Japan was trying to deal with these bad loans and bad assets that was a legacy of the bursting of the bubble economy, the rest of Asia did not stand still. The economic expansion of Asia continued, even as Japan struggled to clear off all of its past bad policies. And China, of course, grew rapidly during that time. And indeed, by 2010, China had actually surpassed Japan as the world's second largest economy. But falling behind China in terms of GDP is hardly Japan's biggest challenge moving forward. Thanks to a generally healthy lifestyle, low-fat diet and all that, lots of exercise, coupled with a high-quality universal healthcare system, the Japanese have a very long life expectancy, which is great. But the downside is that the number of elderly compared to the number of tax-paying workers is continually becoming skewed. Right now, nearly 25%, a quarter of the Japanese population, is over 65 years of age. It's expected that by 2055, about 40% of the population will be over 65 years of age. And so on this chart, you'll see that in a normal economy, when an economy is growing strong, in the 1950s in Japan, there were far more workers and taxpayers compared to old people who were on the welfare system. In 2005, you see this reversing somewhat, but it's still enough so that there are enough taxpayers to carry the burden of those who are actually in need of government support. But according to this forecast, by 2055, the number of those who will require government assistance will far exceed those who will actually be paying taxes. And that, given Japan's very high debt to GDP ratio as it is already, that elderly population time bomb essentially will be one of the biggest challenges that Japan will face, not just financially, but also from a security perspective, from a social perspective, and also from an innovation perspective as well. Another perennial conundrum for Japan is, of course, its lack of natural resources. The earthquake that struck Japan in Fukushima, northern Japan, in March 2011 led not only to over 1,600 people dying, but it also led to a drying up of energy. Japan, until then, had been very dependent on nuclear energy, which had provided 30% of all its energy needs. Since the disaster, only 3 of the 50 reactors have been started up again, and it's questionable whether Japan will actually ever fully get back its nuclear power facilities. There's a lot of public opposition to that, and there's a lot of questioning about the safety of nuclear power and a tremendous amount of public opposition. But then the question is, can there be a silver lining to all of these challenges, these fundamental challenges that Japan faces? And history has shown that the answer could potentially be yes. History has shown that Japan does well under pressure, and increased external pressure in particular has led to innovation. And already, the pressure to meet the needs of a graying society has led to greater investments in things like robotics and the development of consumer technology that makes it easier for older people to live longer on their own. We've seen a huge, tremendous advancements in pharmaceuticals and biotechnology as a direct result of a growing elderly population. The demographic challenge has also given more opportunities to Japanese women. With immigration not seen as a practical solution to this demographic conundrum, there have been concerted efforts to bring in more women, to actually have them stay in the workforce even after they have children, or to get back into the workforce once they take a couple of years off, so that they can actually be part of the solution of the manpower crisis. And of course, the fact that Japan is so energy poor has pushed the country to be on the forefront of developing alternative energy sources and for energy efficiency in the past. And those efforts have only increased since the Fukushima earthquake. And efforts to develop sustainable, renewable energy have only increased. And in fact, at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, the government will be showcasing the potential of hydrogen energy. And they will have, for instance, hydrogen energy-operated cars and buses taking the Olympians across the Olympic Village to really showcase what a non-fossil fuel society could look like and how it could function. And here is a picture of the hydrogen energy car that is a big innovation by Toyota right now, which has a lot of government subsidies to actually make it into a reality. Of course, infrastructure needs to be developed, energy stands need to be produced, roads need to be made to make this a possibility. But when there is a will, there is a way, and there is a true matching of public-private partnership in efforts like these. But of course, one of the biggest strengths, and certainly one of the biggest attractions for visitors to Japan, is its efficiency. And the number of foreign tourists visiting Japan actually reached a record level last year. And half of those tourists were actually Chinese. And what did they enjoy the most? They enjoyed the cleanliness, the efficiency, the politeness, the attention to detail that the Japanese provide across the board and is often lacking in other countries. And so in a world where economic growth is increasingly driven by the knowledge economy and the service sector in particular, these traits of Japanese efficiency and a desire to meet demand may well propel Japan's growth in the future.